This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Israeli forces and the Hamas terrorist group have agreed to pause fighting in the Gaza Strip, but it's not to release the hostages. Both sides agreed to a pause to allow children to get the polio vaccine. This comes as Israeli troops are keeping up the intensity in the West Bank. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest.
On Thursday, Israeli security forces said they completed their mission at Al-Farah refugee camp in the West Bank. Residents were seen inspecting the damage after Israel withdrew their forces from the area.
They destroyed much of the infrastructure in the camp. They bulldozed streets, they destroyed parts of houses, they bombed places of worship, which affected us the most and made us cry.
Israeli forces said they used a drone to enter a mosque in Al-Farah refugee camp, where they saw pictures of terrorists who had been killed on the wall. And inside, they found an explosives laboratory inside the mosque, where they also found more weapons and military equipment. And during another operation in Tulkarm, which is also in the West Bank, Israeli security forces said they had a firefight with terrorists who were hiding inside a mosque. The IDF reported killing 5 terrorists in the mosque, including the leader of a terrorist network in the area. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, Israel and Hamas have agreed to pause fighting, but it's not to release the hostages. On Thursday, the United Nations said both sides agreed to have 3 separate 3-day pauses in specific areas to allow over 500,000 children to get vaccinated against polio. The World Health Organization said last week that at least 1 baby had been paralyzed by the type 2 polio virus. Meanwhile, in Israel, family members of hostages want a pause in fighting to release their loved ones. On Thursday, they attempted to go into the Gaza Strip, but they were stopped by Israeli officials.
We have to sign a deal now and get all the hostages back. And we're calling our prime minister. If you can't do this, we'll get inside and we'll bring them back ourselves. Zip!
And other family members used loudspeakers to shout messages to their loved ones, hoping they could hear them.
You are the most important thing around the world at the moment. My Romy, I've had enough. You don't deserve this. None of you deserve this.
There are still 107 hostages who remain in the Gaza Strip as fears grow that many may have died. Israel's prime minister said they're using negotiations and rescue operations to try to bring them all home. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Ukraine says one of the few F-16 fighter jets it has crashed and the pilot died. This comes as Russia conducted another heavy aerial attack on Ukraine today, the 3rd time in just 4 days. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the update.
Russian attacks on Ukraine continued on Thursday. Ukraine's Air Force said it managed to destroy 60 out of 74 incoming attack drones and 2 out of 5 missiles. The capital city of Kyiv was hit as well. Drone debris damaged an apartment building and caused a fire in a non-residential building. Shortly before the strikes, President Volodymyr Zelensky renewed calls for the West to lift weapons restrictions.
We continue to insist that their determination now, lifting the restrictions on long-range strikes for Ukraine now.
Zelensky says he needs long-range missiles to strike weapons stored deep inside Russia. On Thursday, former Defense Secretary Mark Esper commented on Zelensky's request.
Russia has been ranging Ukraine now for 2.5 years, striking both military and civilian targets. So it's a very, very reasonable proposition.
The top diplomat of the European Union agreed on Thursday.
The weaponry that we are providing to Ukraine has to have full use, and the restrictions has to be lifted.
Just days ago on Monday, Russia had launched one of its biggest attacks on Ukraine yet, with hundreds of drones and missiles. On Thursday, Ukraine's army said one of its F-16 fighter jets crashed during the attack, and the pilot was killed. The plane was one of just a handful that Ukraine received from the West. The donated planes arrived at the end of last month. Monday's crash was the first reported loss of an F-16 in Ukraine. And Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met with his Polish counterpart on Thursday.
Poland has shown exceptional leadership on Ukraine, including providing vital logistics support and substantial security assistance.
Austin also thanked his counterpart for allowing the US to station 10,000 troops in Poland. Austin says this guarantees that NATO will be able to defend itself against aggression if necessary. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
On his last day in China, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with the head of the Chinese Communist Party. The goal to maintain communications ahead of the U.S. election in November and beyond. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the White House.
On the last day of his three-day visit to Beijing, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with the head of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, as well as other Chinese officials like Foreign Minister Wang Yi. They spoke for 14 hours behind closed doors, but coming out of it, still there was no show of a policy change between the two countries. They talked about national security concerns, including fentanyl in the U.S. that comes from China, as well as Taiwan, the Chinese regime's support for the Russians' military and its war against Ukraine. But another topic of concern coming out of the meetings that Sullivan noted was economic security concerns. That includes Chinese technology coming to the U.S. but being used by the Chinese regime to spy on Americans, as well as overcapacity concerns where the Chinese regime, they subsidize Chinese companies in order to flood the market with low-priced goods and outcompete all the others. Take a look at Sullivan in Beijing.
And I also raised our concerns about steps that the PRC has taken with respect to the intersection of economics and national security and the impact that that has had on Western businesses and on supply chains. And so we had a vigorous give and take on the issue. Obviously, we didn't come to agreement on certain aspects of things.
Now, tensions have been rising, especially in the South China Sea. Just earlier this week, Japan noted that a Chinese military jet flew into its airspace, apparently for the first time. And over in the Philippines, while the Coast Guard there was completing humanitarian resupply missions, they were blocked by 40 Chinese vessels. The White House confirmed that a call between President Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping will take place soon. But as for them meeting in person, it's still unclear. They're both likely to attend the upcoming G20 and APEC summits, which they can speak on the sidelines of. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
According to an audit by the Justice Department's Inspector General released today, the FBI has continued to mishandle allegations of child sexual abuse. This is following the Bureau's notorious missteps in the investigation into disgraced USA gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar. The audit says that because of those failures, allegations of sexual abuse against children were left unaddressed for months, while minors continue to be victimized. The Inspector General reviewed 327 cases for the audit. It found that in nearly half of the cases, FBI employees failed to comply with the requirement to report allegations to local law enforcement. This is despite the FBI implementing several changes around how they report, investigate, and document allegations of child sexual abuse since the Nassar probe. The Bureau responded to the audit, saying that ensuring the safety and security of children is a, quote, solemn duty, and that it's committed to maintaining the public's trust by implementing the necessary improvements. U.S. authorities played a key role in stopping a terror plot. It could have killed thousands of people at a Taylor Swift concert in Vienna this month. The CIA's Deputy Director David Cohen said yesterday the agency alerted Austrian authorities about the planned attack inspired by ISIS.
They were plotting to kill a huge number, tens of thousands of people at this concert, including, I'm sure, many Americans, and were quite advanced in this. The Austrians were able to make those arrests because the agency and our partners in the intelligence community provided them information about what this ISIS-connected group was planning to do.
According to Cohen, the suspects were plotting to kill tens of thousands of people at Swift's concert. He did not say how the CIA had learned about the planned attack. 4 people were arrested in connection with the plot. Some were reportedly found with bomb-making materials and had access to the concert venue. Officials said one of the men, a 19-year-old Austrian, had pledged allegiance to ISIS. They said he focused on Swift's tour as a target. The terror threat forced Swift to cancel her concerts in Vienna. She thanked authorities in a social media post last week, saying because of them, we're grieving missed concerts and not lives. The CDC says that 9 people have now died amid a nationwide Listeria outbreak. The outbreak is linked to Boar's head deli meat products. NTD's Christina Corona has the latest.
In an update released Wednesday, the CDC reported that at least 57 people have been infected with the Listeria outbreak strain linked to the contaminated deli meats. All of those affected required hospitalization. Infections have been reported in 18 states. The 9 confirmed deaths include 2 in South Carolina and 1 each in Illinois, New Jersey, Virginia, Florida, Tennessee, New Mexico, and New York. According to the CDC, recent illnesses might not be reported yet, as it typically takes 3 to 4 weeks to identify cases in an outbreak. Symptoms of Listeria contamination can include fever, muscle aches, a stiff neck, convulsions, and confusion. These symptoms can be more severe in pregnant women, those over 65, or people with weakened immune systems. The Boar's Head recall was first issued in July for a liverwurst product and has since expanded to include various items like sliced ham, sausages, and loaves from the same plant in Jarrett, Virginia. New USDA records reveal persistent issues with mold, mildew, and insects at the Virginia plant. A Boar's Head spokesperson said all operations have been suspended as the company works to disinfect the facility and retrain staff. No products will be released until they meet the highest quality and safety standards. So make sure to check your fridge for any of these recalled items, as Listeria can grow even in cold temperatures. Also make sure to clean your fridge, containers, or any surfaces that may have touched the recalled meats. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
Let's turn now to the murder of 4 University of Idaho students who were stabbed to death in 2022. Defendant Brian Koberger appeared in court today. His attorneys are asking the court to move the trial to a different location. They argue that Koberger could only get a fair trial in another location. The defense team says they surveyed potential jurors in Latah County, where the trial is taking place. They found that 70% of the respondents already believe Koberger is guilty. Some respondents also said they would riot, burn down the courthouse, or lynch Koberger if he is acquitted. Prosecutors asked the court not to accept the change of venue. They say the survey data was biased and flawed. Koberger is charged with 4 murders. His trial starts in June 2025. In an appeal to swing state voters, former President Trump is holding a town hall tonight in the battleground state of Wisconsin. The event will be moderated by former Democrat Tulsi Gabbard. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us more from the city of La Crosse.
Tonight at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, former President Trump will sit down right behind us for a town hall to be moderated by former Democratic Congresswoman and DNC Vice Chair Tulsi Gabbard, who just endorsed him last week. It comes as Trump is trying to appeal to independent and potentially undecided voters in this election who will decide the outcome in November. He's been traveling to battleground states like Michigan and Wisconsin, and we spent the past 2 days talking to about dozens of voters here in Wisconsin, including some undecided ones. One lady told me today that she likes Trump's policies on the economy, but is also closely watching what Kamala Harris, the vice president, could bring to the economy. Watch.
You didn't pay as much for gas, you didn't pay as much for food. Don't care for his name calling, you know, to me that's childish. Still watching Harris because she's new, nobody really knows about her. But start telling us what you're all about and how you're going to change what's going on right now.
Meanwhile, another gentleman told me that he wants both sides to tone down the personal attacks. He says he wants to see more substance and facts. Watch.
The people creating the negative is someone I will not vote for. However, it's happening on both sides. If our politicians could just be working with the facts as they really are, it makes me think much better of them.
And earlier today, the former president was campaigning in another battleground state of Michigan, and his running mate, J.D. Vance, was talking to a group of firefighters in Boston, Massachusetts. J.D. Vance was trying to appeal to those who are not necessarily in the MAGA camp. Watch.
Your long economic nightmare will very soon be over. It's going to be over. Going to turn it around. With your vote,
He changed my mind, and he won my vote. And for the skeptics still out there, I hope he has changed your minds too.
I mean, well, a lot of these undecided voters told me that they're looking out for two things. One will be the first formal sit-down interview by Vice President Kamala Harris to be aired on CNN tonight, and the other one is the first debate between Trump and Harris to happen on September 10th in Philadelphia. Meanwhile, tonight, as this town hall will be moderated by a former Democrat, Trump will get another chance of reaching out to voters on the other side. Reporting from La Crosse, Wisconsin, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Vice President Kamala Harris wrapped up her tour of southern Georgia with a final rally. She spoke just moments ago in Savannah. NTD's Jason Blair brings us the highlights and a preview of her sit-down with CNN.
Vice President Kamala Harris toured South Georgia for 2 days before ending her trip here in Savannah at End Market Arena.
For a future where we build what I call an opportunity economy, so that every American has the opportunity to own a home, to start a business, and to build wealth and intergenerational wealth.
Earlier today, they recorded an interview with CNN, which will air Thursday night. It's the team's first formal interview with the press.
Generally speaking, how should voters look at some of the changes that you've made, that you've explained some of here in your policy?
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. You mentioned the Green New Deal. I have always believed, and I have worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. We did that with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Harris made a few more stops in South Georgia before coming to the rally here in Savannah.
For a future with affordable child care, paid leave, and affordable health care. And on that last subject, let's finally expand Medicaid in Georgia.
Georgia has only backed 2 Democratic presidents since 1992, one of those being Biden in 2020, which he won the state by only 12,000 votes. However, the Harris campaign is showing that they believe it's a battleground worth fighting. They said they want to bring up the margins in areas outside of the cities as a wider strategy instead of just relying on the major metropolitan areas. Reporting in Savannah, Georgia, Jason Blair, NTD News.
And joining us now to discuss Harris and Walz's joint interview tonight is Dante Mills. He's a political strategist, attorney, and founding partner of Mills and Edwards, LLP. Dante, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, to begin, given the compressed timeline that the Democratic side is dealing with, what questions does Harris need to answer in that interview tonight?
Tiffany, good evening. We are looking forward to this interview. We've been waiting for her to have a sit down where she has a back and forth and doesn't just speak off a teleprompter. I think there's two separate things that people are looking for in this interview. One is details about her plan for the economy. And that package you just showed, it talked about, and Vice President Harris talked about, an opportunity economy where people would have the opportunity to create small businesses, to own homes, things that will be able to generate wealth for themselves moving forward. I don't think people want to hear that she's going to give handouts to people that will go away and won't help them long term. I think America is looking for more of that if she plans to help the middle class. And that's going to be the focus of today, how she can get out some of those details about the economy and make people comfortable believing that she's going to help them be able to feed their families. That's the number one thing in the election. And the other thing, which is equally as important, is how she projects herself. I don't think she's doing herself a service by doing the interview with her vice presidential candidate. I think she should be up there by herself, showing strength, but she still has the opportunity during the interview to make people comfortable with her being the leader of the country. That's still important. People are going to vote for somebody that they have trust in, that they have confidence in, and how she projects in an interview is going to have a big to do with that, how they perceive her.
And we do actually have a preview clip of tonight's interview, so let's take a look at that.
Generally speaking, how should voters look at some of the changes that you've made, that you've explained some of here in your policy? Is it because you have more experience now and you've learned more about the information? Is it because you were running for president in a Democratic primary? And should they feel comfortable and confident that what you're saying now is going to be your policy moving forward?
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. You mentioned the Green New Deal. I have always believed, and I have worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. We did that with the Inflation Reduction Act. We have set goals for the United States of America and by extension the globe around when we should meet certain standards for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as an example. That value has not changed.
And Dante, what do you make of Harris's answer there about her shifting on key policy positions?
It's interesting, Tiffany. We've actually talked about this before. I think politicians should have the ability to learn and grow. We don't want someone who's going to be stuck on an idea simply because they believed it to be true before. And she had a lot of her platform that she talked about when she was running for president back in the 2020 cycle. But since that time, she's been vice president for 3.5 years. And I'm sure she did some learning on the job. And she may have recognized that something she thought would make sense really wasn't feasible and didn't make sense. For example, fracking, which is something we often talk about. Yes, she came out and said she would ban it when she was running for the 2020 election. However, since then, as the vice president, we're up to producing more oil barrels, 13 million than ever before, and she's passed legislation protecting it. I think she went to Pennsylvania during that vice presidential process and saw that it's needed for the workers there, for that state to really be able to have an economy that grows. So I think politicians should have the ability to get better, to get smarter, and to develop their ideas. As long as she said, her foundation hasn't changed, but how she implements things, I think it should change as you learn more on the job.
And expanding on that, there's been a lot of talk about Harris flip-flopping on issues. Now, from what we've seen so far, these shifts haven't been articulated directly by Harris, but by anonymous aides speaking to the media. How do you see voters viewing this if Harris doesn't clearly state her policies or explain any shifts in position?
They're not going to know. And that's part of the problem we're still facing, where we still don't know everything that Vice President Kamala Harris stands for and what she's going to push as her primary agenda if she becomes the president. Hopefully during this interview process, when we're hearing from her directly with the back and forth, she'll be pushed on some answers. They'll ask some Dana Bash will ask some follow-up questions that will make her really flush out what her beliefs are. People really are looking to hear that, but ultimately it's going to come down to the economy. There may be some questions that they have about other parts of her policy, her foreign policy, immigration, those things are important. But if people believe she can help them feed their families, that's all this election is going to come down to. And her win is going to be based on that, or her loss will be based on how she can describe to the American people what she will do for the middle class to help this economy.
And circling to your earlier point about Governor Walz appearing in this interview tonight, is that a good move for the campaign? What do you see him adding or subtracting by being there?
I don't like it. She should be able to stand on her own 2 feet. And I believe she can. And when you looked at the clip that you just showed, he's sitting next to her. He's not commenting, which means he's not adding any substance to it. And if he starts answering questions, why can't she answer those questions? If he's not answering questions, What's the purpose of him being there? I don't like this move. I'm curious as to why. I wonder if they'll come out with a statement as to why she chose to have him sitting next to her. But I believe she can stand on her own, and she has to prove that she can because she's going to be the one making decisions as the president if the American people are going to trust her enough to vote her in.
And we have just come out of the DNC with some political analysts noting this is typically when a presidential candidate hits their peak momentum. Now, what's at stake with this interview tonight in terms of keeping that momentum and voter enthusiasm going strong?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot, Tiffany. Vice President Harris being in the honeymoon phase. And it seems as if she's been in the honeymoon phase since she was anointed the top of the ticket. And kind of handed the keys to the Democratic Party. There hasn't been a lot of pushback, a lot of bad rhetoric or media coverage about her. But this is her opportunity to either continue that track or derail it completely. If she comes out and shows that she can't answer questions, she can't articulate what she will do for this country, that honeymoon phase will be over. And any bump that she had coming out of the convention that was last week will be gone. And she will be in trouble. Her candidacy and her campaign will be in trouble. But if she can weather this, which shouldn't even be a storm, because she does have Dana Bash is a great journalist, and I think will be fair to her. So she's not per se in the lion's den. If she can kind of weather this situation and come out of it with clear and concise responses, with that people understand and they trust her at the end of this interview, then I think she can ride that wave that she had coming out of the Democratic National Convention, probably to the election, or at least until the first debate, which is weeks away, and that will be a great place for her to be in.
Dante Mills, political strategist, attorney, and founding partner at Mills & Edwards, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
House Republicans and Democrats are doubling down on their messaging ahead of the general election. A handful of congressional races will determine the composition of the House, which Republicans control with the smallest majority in decades. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
With a little over 2 months to go until the general elections, House Republican Conference is doubling down on its messaging on the economy and the border crisis.
$25,000 for first-time home buyers is only going to raise the price of homes on first-time home buyers by $25,000. Her price gouging or price control regime, however you want to phrase it, is only going to lead to scarcity amongst food products and potentially higher prices as well.
8 out of the 9 press releases published by the House Republican Conference since President Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race are regarding the economy and the border crisis.
I think we need to stay focused on the issues American people care about, which is the cost of things, inflation, crime, open border. But I remain very optimistic that we're not just going to hold the House majority. We'll increase our majority.
On the other hand, House Democratic Conference has only published 2 press releases since President Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race, and they're both regarding Project 2025 and its alleged threat to democracy.
Well, they are very concerned about exercising the right to vote. Georgia families want to make sure that their voices are heard. More so, they want to make sure that their voice and their vote counts. But as we have always done, we will stand on the shoulders of those that have come before us, our icons. Martin Luther King Jr.
Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro has put in doubt the peaceful transfer of power in 2025, while House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has pinned a video on his social media account from a speech he gave at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, highlighting how he believes Republicans are a threat to democracy.
I don't know, and I can't say with 100% confidence that if Kamala Harris wins this election and Republicans control one chamber of the Congress, that they're going to be willing to certify the election.
The circus has already come to town. Chaos, crisis, confusion, and craziness versus Democrats who deliver for the American people.
According to the Cook Political Report House race ratings, there are 22 toss-up congressional elections this cycle. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Over to Japan, millions were ordered to evacuate their homes as Typhoon Shanshan slammed into the country with strong winds and heavy rain. At least 4 people have been killed and dozens injured so far.
More than 5 million people have been told to evacuate from their homes as Typhoon Shanshan lashed southwest Japan on Thursday. After hovering over the southerly Kyushu island for the next few days, the storm is expected to approach Tokyo around the weekend, the country's weather agency said. Strong winds and heavy rain knocked out power and forced major factories to close. Authorities warned Shanshan could be one of the strongest ever storms to hit the region as they assessed the death toll and reported scores left injured. Toyota suspended operations in all of its domestic plants due to the storm, while Nissan, Honda, and chip makers Renesas and Tokyo Electron also temporarily halted production at some factories. The typhoon produced gusts of up to 112 miles per hour, according to the weather agency. Around 230,000 households in 7 prefectures were without power in the afternoon, according to Kyushu Electric Power Company. However, the company said there was no impact at the Sendai nuclear power plant in Satsuma Sendai City, where the storm made a landfall earlier on Thursday. Airlines announced cancellations of nearly 800 flights. Train services have been suspended in many areas of Kyushu, while hundreds of bus and ferry services have also been halted, according to the Transport Ministry. Typhoon Shanshan is the latest harsh weather system to hit Japan following Typhoon Ampil, which also led to blackouts and evacuations earlier this month.
A Hong Kong court found 2 former news editors guilty today for publishing what it called seditious content on a pro-democracy media site. The former editors of Stand News were charged under a law that's been increasingly used to target dissent.
A Hong Kong court on Thursday found 2 editors at the now defunct Stand News media outlet guilty of sedition. This is the first sedition conviction against any journalist or editor since Hong Kong's handover from Britain to China in 1997. The case has received international scrutiny amid a security crackdown in the China-ruled city. The 2 editors, Chung Pui-kyun and Patrick Lam, who wasn't there for the verdict, could face a maximum jail term of 2 years. Stand News was once a leading online media platform in Hong Kong, featuring a mix of critical reportage and commentary. And critics of this case, including the US government, say the verdict reflects deteriorating media freedoms in the city. Stand News was raided by police in December 2021 and had its assets frozen, leading to its closure a few days later. The editors and the outlet's parent company were all charged with conspiracy to publish seditious publications in connection with 17 news articles and commentaries from July 2020 to December 2021. The articles included commentaries written by exiled activists. The editors pleaded not guilty. When testifying in court, Chung said the site had simply sought to reflect a spectrum of voices, including pro-democracy advocates.
For more in-depth news from China and analysis on what it means for the West, stay tuned for China in Focus tonight on NTD. The Pentagon, NASA, and other key government agencies are sending enormous amounts of U.S. taxpayer dollars into China, and the money is helping to fund research in strategic fields. We hear from House China hawks about why they are so concerned. That's tonight at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on China in Focus. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg said in a Monday letter that Biden administration officials pressured his company to censor COVID-related content and that he regrets doing so. Joining us now to discuss the details is Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry. Back when he was Louisiana's Attorney General, Landry filed a lawsuit alleging federal agencies violated the First Amendment by pressuring social media firms to restrict posts about COVID-19, vaccines, and other issues. Governor, thank you so much for joining us. First, what is your reaction to Zuckerberg's letter, especially considering this touches on the heart of the lawsuit you filed back when you were the Attorney General?
Look, I'm extremely excited and really do appreciate Mark Zuckerberg stepping out and confirming a lot of the things that we already knew. I think now, looking back, he regrets not being a little more forceful in voicing the type of pressure that the administration and those agencies were putting on Facebook. Because when we look back and we see the things that many Americans were posting and discussing at that time, we find out that those things are a lot truer today than we were led to believe. And the reason we were led to believe that they were untrue was because the White House and those in federal agencies were suppressing that information. That was at the heart of the lawsuit that we filed, both myself and then Attorney General Eric Schmidt of Missouri, who's now a U.S. Senator. And so again, I would like to know what many of those on the Supreme Court who refused to hold the injunction that we had this year, they dissolved the injunction, are thinking today.
And Governor, following Zuckerberg's comments, is Louisiana planning a future lawsuit against the federal government?
Well, interestingly enough, the lawsuit continues. The only thing that the Supreme Court did was dissolve the injunction. I think it was extremely dangerous and irresponsible on their part to do it in an election year, because part of the things that we found out was that the FBI knew and had possession of the Hunter Biden laptop during the 2020 election. And yet they, at the same time, were telling Facebook and many of the other social media companies that it was a Russian hoax when they knew they had the laptop in their possession. So again, our lawsuit will continue. We will continue to be able to collect the discovery. I think, if I'm not mistaken, but RFK Jr. just intervened in that particular case and was and his intervention is standing before the district court.
And what are your next steps then in this case?
Well, again, the current Attorney General, Liz Muriel, is continuing to prosecute that litigation and looking at ways in which we can continue to get in front of the courts and make the case that the United States Supreme Court said was not there.
And digging into what Zuckerberg said here, if courts find that Meta acted as a government apparatus, does that void the protections these platforms currently claim under Section 230?
Well, it wouldn't void the Section 230 immunity that they have, but what it would do is allow those people whose voices were suppressed to be able to take what's called 1983 actions against the federal government. The federal government would then be in violation of violating those citizens' First Amendment rights.
On that note, in light of Zuckerberg's comments, journalist Alex Berenson is saying he'll amend his lawsuit against President Biden and Pfizer, which alleges pressure from government agencies to censor his social media posts during the pandemic. Now, Berenson says with Zuckerberg's admission, he thinks he'll be successful now. Governor, do you think Zuckerberg's comments are significant enough to change the outcome of these First Amendment lawsuits?
They should be. They should be a validation to allow those people who have evidence to show where, and a lot of that evidence came out of our case, to show where the government did suppress Americans' voices on social platforms. They did it. We found out. We have the evidence where they suppressed Tucker Carlson, Robert Kennedy Jr. And again, here's the important part that I think the Supreme Court missed. The White House and all of these agencies have a social media account. They have the ability to push back against misinformation and disinformation on their accounts. They don't need to suppress the things that Americans are saying inside of a virtual public square. The problem they have is they've got no credibility, and they know it because what they're doing is they're lying to the American people.
Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty to discuss today, but let's start in the NFL, where Tom Brady is bidding to become a part owner of the Las Vegas Raiders while preparing to do color commentary as one of Fox's NFL broadcasters. How is the league handling this potential conflict of interest?
Well, they just laid out a number of broadcasting restrictions on him this week should he become a part owner. Now, for one thing, he wouldn't be able to visit other teams' players, coaches, facilities. He can't watch practice. None of those, broadcaster things can he do even virtually because he'd be a member of another team or really franchise. And these visits, these are very common practice for the entire broadcast team leading up to each week's game. Now, the reason is he could possibly pass on some insider information, game plans to his own team. I mean, I would doubt he would do it, but the possibility still exists there. Now, plus, as far as tampering with other players, he'll be subject to that rule like any other team executive while he's on air. Now, that certainly seems like it would be a hindrance to his job. Now, the NFL defines tampering as any public or private statement of interest in another club's player to the media as being a violation. That's a very broad rule. It seems kind of open to interpretation. I think he's going to be walking a tightrope for like 3 hours every Sunday with this. Now, Fox, which signed him to that 10-year, $375 million contract to be their commentator starting this fall, they've got to be having some reservations about how this is going to work out. I'm sure they hope he ditches his ownership plans with the Raiders.
Looking at tennis news, today is day 4 of the U.S. Open, and both the men's and women's top-ranked players were in action. How did they do?
Both had dominating wins. Iga Swiatek, women's number 1, she won 6-0, 6-1, took just over an hour. She's into the 3rd round. Meanwhile, the men's side, Yannick Sinner, he won in straight sets as well. It took just an hour and a half for him to do it. Now, on the men's side tonight, we've got 2 former U.S. Open champions in action. We've got Carlos Alcaraz, who won it in 2022. He'll play at 8:30 Eastern Time. Daniel Medvedev, who won it in 2021, he plays right at the top of the hour, 7 o'clock coming up soon. Now, Sinner and Medvedev could actually face off in the quarterfinals next week, and will really be the first big match of this event. But they've got to win a couple more matches to get there first.
Shifting gears to college football, this is the first full weekend of games, and it starts tonight with 4 ranked teams in action, including your Kansas Jayhawks. Now, on paper, it doesn't look like we have any competitive games tonight, though.
Yeah, hopefully not. Now, 22nd ranked KU is 49-point favorites tonight against Lindenwood, which just moved up to Division I 2 years ago. I mean, honestly, I never heard of them, but this is our first game against an FBS opponent, so maybe that explains it. Elsewhere tonight, we've got Missouri, Utah, and NC State are also in action. All our top 25 teams as well. All our big favorites as well, just like KU against lesser-known teams. Now, this is usually how the season starts for most programs. They want to have a game against a perceived lesser opponent to see where their weaknesses are and still win before they get into conference play. Now, that's especially true this year for those Big Ten and SEC teams. Both of those conferences have imported some powerhouse programs in the name of getting bigger TV deals. So the conference schedules aren't really unforgiving, but they generally don't play conference games for a couple more weeks. That'll be when the best teams start to separate themselves.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.